Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and believe it or not, this is take 3 of my overviews and thoughts for Final Fantasy XIV's 36th live letter. TLDR, they covered the majority of the combat changes, went over a bunch of new skills, PvP changes, jump potions, which we'll get to talk about later, as well as a ton of little intricacies. I've left my Twitch chat on the screen so you can see them pointing out my mistakes, as well as, well, just pog-champing on occasion. But everything else, all the alerts that I usually have on Twitch have all been removed. Now, keep in mind that this live letter was so long, I'm going to do one video for the overview and thoughts. I'm definitely going to have to do smaller videos for each of the individual aspects that came out of this. So, if you want to wait for those videos, I understand. If not, get your butt in your seat. We're going to be here a while. I got like 13 or 14 pages of notes to go through. So everything we have written down here, while regularly paraphrased, was officially translated by the Square Enix crew. So none of this is an unofficial translation. That being said, they also gave us a disclaimer. Everything they utilized, all the in-game footage, the damage formulas, substats, potencies, how abilities interact, numerical values or icons, while they did use in-game footage, those are all subject to change. Nothing you saw or hear here is considered final. They are making adjustments all the way until the final minute. So with that out of the way, we have our Stormblood login screen. They started with the Revolutions music video / trailer. Foxclaw lost his voice. They even got him to say, "I am your father." Almost like a more, I guess, less robot-y Darth Vader. But let's just get right into all the things that they talked about, because we're going to be here forever. So the first 2.5 hours was like all the combat system changes, cross-roll system, individual job updates, job UI changes, the job action trailer, all those things. So they listed their current issues with the game's combat. Overly complex job rotations, too many actions, not enough hotbar space, too much buff management, too big of a DPS disparity between core and casual players, and a lack of synergy between jobs, specifically noting how Monk is a very selfish DPS, making changes so that there's more synergy regardless of which job you're actually playing. So first things first, cross-class system, the one we have now, is being abolished, and they are replacing it with role actions, also known as the cross-roll or X-roll system. Basically, all tanks have a set of abilities they can pull from, all healers have a set of abilities they can pull from, etc., etc., and you can have 5 of them maximum, and they all have different effects. Some of the tank actions were consolidated down, some of the healer actions were consolidated down, so you may see things like, for example, for tanks, Rampart is now no longer a Paladin skill, it is a cross-roll skill. Same goes for Convalescence, Reprisal, Low Blow, Awareness, and Provoke. Those are all built into all of the tanks, and they can choose to take these skills at any point. There's also some new ones in the form of Shirk, Ultimatum, Interject, Anticipation. Again, these are strictly tank abilities or tank cross-roll actions. That also means that some things aren't there anymore. You know, there's no second wind for Warrior. There's no internal release. You know, Bloodbath wasn't even on that list for any of the tanks. So there's a lot of things that are changing here with the actions you actually have available to you. So we have a total of 5 slots. You unlock them at 12, 28, 32, 40, and 48. They also showed some in-game footage showing the caster cross-class skills. Swiftcast, APOC is a cross-roll skill now. Surecast, Addle, which they said was like a changed virus, an ability to remove dots from themselves, the ability to give MP to party members. But other things, Raging Strikes and Quelling Strikes, were both gone. But there was a new one called Diversion, which was like a mini Shadewalker, I suppose. Switching back to the PowerPoint, they showed off some of the new UI elements. They showed off the way that the actions on your action bar may have changed. Old abilities that don't exist anymore or have been moved into the cross-roll system will be grayed out on your hotbar when the expansion comes out. So make sure to remove the skills you can't use anymore and replace them with the new skills that you've actually obtained. You won't have to go back and do any of the old quests to get any new skills. You'll just have to drag them onto your hotbar and then do whatever you need to do from 60 to 70. Some other things. They swapped back to tank to check out the cross-roll again. Low Blow is now the only off-global cooldown stun for tanks in the cross-roll system. Paladin still has Shield Bash, making it the only tank that has an innate stun in their kit that isn't a cross-roll ability. Important thing to note. It also had no damage tied to it at all. Interject was a silence tanks can take. Reprisal now no longer requires parry procs, but it lasts for a shorter period of time and is just the 10% damage reduction. Melee DPS, we saw some cross-roll stuff. Second Wind, Invigorate, Goad, important. Leg Sweep, Diversion, which is the one we mentioned earlier. Bloodbath was on that list as well. And there was also a new cross-roll skill that removed directional requirements for skills for 15 seconds. So that's going to be interesting because there's definitely points on some bosses where you almost can't do a positional, but you're going to keep with your rotation. So that's something where that skill would be incredibly useful, or when people like have to stack in front of the boss or something. Ranged physical cross-roll, we saw Swift Song, Second Wind, Invigorate. Like you can see, there is some overlap here. All the Machinist CC skills, the Silence, the Bind, and the Heavy, looked like they were all on there as well. Healer crossroll, Cleric Stance, which we'll be talking about in more detail in a second. Swift Cast, Protect, Surecast, Isuna were all there. Something that looked like Divine Seal, something that looked like Shroud of Saints, and something that looked like Eye for an Eye were also all there. But they were all different colors than the previous ones that we are used to. So it's hard to tell if they're changed or if they're just reusing icons. We can't say for certain. There was no Stone Skin on the White Mage's hotbar. There was no Stone Skin in the crossroll system. Might mean Stone Skin's gone, pretty much. Now, the big change that people are talking about here is healer damage. Because Cleric Stance is crossroll, and it's still called Cleric Stance, I think it needs a change. Healer damage no longer scales off intelligence. It now scales off of mind, which means that you will just always do more damage as a healer. Cleric Stance is now an offensive cooldown that gives you a little bit more damage for like 15 seconds that you can use to further boost your damage. So it means that if you want to DPS, there's no more stance dancing. It's something that's far more natural. But Cleric Stance also, you don't need to take it to get that little bit of a damage buff. If you're someone who's not huge on DPSing as a healer, but you maybe want to try it here and there, just like in tiny spurts, you could do so without taking Cleric Stance if you're not comfortable that you'll ever have a 15-second time frame in which you just want to buff your damage. That being said, Cleric Stance also didn't reduce healing anymore. So it doesn't swap in mind, it doesn't reduce healing. So even if you use Cleric Stance and all of a sudden have to heal, your potencies aren't going to be nerfed into the ground either. They also we noticed a few things on the hotbar, but I'll come back to that because I cover them in more detail later. They switched to Monk and they showed off some new UI elements. There was no blood for blood on their hotbar, so again, it looks like buff consolidation is really starting to be reduced to what's natural to the job, plus whatever's in the crossroll system. UI elements were for Grease Lightning and Chakra to help keep track of them more easily. There's some new abilities you can see on the hotbar, which we'll talk about later. And then they mention a new buff that they gave to Monk. So it says, and I'm just going to say what they said, it raises their party's physical damage dealt. Anyone in range of the buff, if they use a weapon skill, which is a melee global cooldown skill more specifically, the monk gets chakra stacks from the nearby party members using their weapon skills while under this effect. So you get the ability to spam your skills. I mean, it makes purification a little bit more accessible. It makes forbidden chakra way more spammable. And it should be something that gives monks utility regardless of, what the other melees are in the composition. So it works well for all the melees. Let's see, what else do they have? They showed off the chakra building UI element. We'll have to come back to that. Then they covered job gauges. Pretty much every job got a gauge, which helps them keep track of their resources. A lot of those resources no longer appear on their buff bar either. You have to look at the gauge and use the gauge in order to keep track of what it is that you're gaining as a resource. We'll show the picture down here. These are just more emphasis, like what their goals were and stuff like that. So you can see all the different job gauges on the screen. Paladin having a shield and a sword oath one, Dark Knight having the blood gauge, Warrior having defiance and deliverance, Scholar having what looks like ether flow and a fairy gauge, Monk having grease lightning and chakras. Samurai, I think they called this a Kenki? I think it was Kinki, like Kinki gauge, and a Sen gauge, which is the one on the left. Astrologian keeps track of all their cards and what Royal Road effect they have. White Mage has this rose, and I think those little ones are called lilies, in a sense. Oh, yeah, Kenki right here. No, it's Kenki. I did write it down. Kenki gauge right there. A good thing I did write it down. And then we have more job gauges. Dragoon has Blood of the Dragon plus another one. Bard has all their songs, durations, as well as certain effects that they have. Ninja has Huton and their, is this called a Ninki gauge? I can't remember anymore. We have the Summoner ones, which are Ether Flow and their Dreadworm Trance in 2 different forms. We have a Black Mage one, which has way too many things on it, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Machinist, which has their heat gauge and their ammo, and Red Mage, which has their white mana and black mana. So, moving on, we basically just cover what each of the UI things have to do with each other. But again, we'll go into more detail on the more job-specific stuff in a little bit. So Yoshi P wanted to show off some new job skills, and one of the big ones was Enochian. Enochian pretty much stays active 100% of the time now, as long as you are in Astral Fire or Umbral Ice. As soon as you enter Astral Fire or Umbral Ice, you can choose to activate Enochian. And then every 30 seconds, Enochian gives you an expendable buff, pretty much, that you can use to cast a certain skill on your hotbar, one that we'll talk about later. The UI element also helps them keep track, what are they in, Astral Fire or Umbral Ice. They also have a new resource called Umbral Hearts, which they get specifically from casting Blizzard 4. We couldn't really tell what they were doing when we see them use it later, but it looked like every time he used Fire 4, it used an Umbral Heart. But Fire 4 didn't require an Umbral Heart in order to use, so we're not 100% certain. He also had used one of his other skills, which is new, Triple Cast, in order to instant cast all 3 of those Fire 4. So it's very difficult to see what effect the Umbral Hearts was actually having on the Fire 4s. Eventually, I believe we saw him use Flare and generate an Umbral Heart. I got to look back at it again, but I'm almost positive that that's how I saw it used. And then they just show off all those different elements. He uses one of those new stacks, the one that I said you get for keeping Enochian active for 30 seconds. And it was an ability called Foul that did massive damage. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. Every 30 seconds, as long as you're maintaining Enochian, you get this incredible cast in that of Foul. And so as long as you don't lose Enochian, that's your benefit on top of just, the general Enochian effects. But if you're dropping Astral Fire and Umbral Ice, you got other problems, or it's fight specific or something like that. So, you know what I mean. We also see the White Mage casting Stone 4, as well as the Black Mage casting an AoE Thunder. We later found out that was indeed Thunder 4, which we'll have more details on later. Warrior was up next. They showed the Defiance and Deliverance. They replaced Wrath and Abandon with the Beast Gauge. Xeno's proud. Storm's Eye. Now, Storm's Eye and Storm's Path are the two things we were looking at the most, because those were things we expected Warrior to kind of have a little bit of attention for. The main thing that changed is Maim applied the slashing debuff, and Storm's Eye provided some sort of other buff. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the main buff or it was just a new specific Storm's Eye power, but that's what it did, pretty much. On top of that, Path didn't do anything in terms of debuffs. So the Path debuff looks to be gone. What it did do was generate more Beast Gauge, however. So that might be the decision you have to make going forward based on what we saw here. You may have to decide, hey, do I need Enmity? Butcher's Block. Do I need my buffs and debuffs? Maim and Storm's Eye. Do I just want to generate extra Beast Gauge? Storm's Path. That looks to be the decision that you'll actually be making with your global cooldowns as a warrior. Another thing is they did not get pacified after Berserk, and they got rid of, again, the warrior's built-in stun. You need low blow if you're going to do that now. Yoshi P then did 5 Fell Cleaves back-to-back. Basically, each Fell Cleave was costing, I don't know, it was like 25 or 35. I think it was 25 gauge, and then he infuriated to get 50 gauge back. So he did 5 Fell Cleaves back-to-back. If it was 35, I think the maximum you could do is 5 Fell Cleaves. But if it is 25... I need to go back and watch. In theory, you could do 6 Fell Cleaves then, because let's say you start at 100 and you do Fell Cleave, and you bring it down to 50, and then you infuriate and you do Fell Cleave, Fell Cleave, Fell Cleave, Fell Cleave. That's 6. So he may not have even done the maximum number of Fell Cleaves that was humanly possible, because he ended with a little bit of gauge left. So that's a lot of Fell Cleaves. By the way, reminder, damage formulas have changed. Just saying. He also had other abilities that used Beast Gauge. The Gap Closer used Beast Gauge. He had another attack that was a punch that used Beast Gauge as well. So Beast Gauge has a few uses, and yeah, please look forward to it. Monk they showed again. Monk was not abundantly clear everything. So they mentioned Riddle of Earth and Riddle of Fire. So Riddle of Earth refreshes Grease Lightning in some way. I don't think they specifically said how it does it, but that it is used to extend the duration in certain situations. Riddle of Fire, Did they mention exactly what Riddle of Fire did? Because I was so busy taking notes going back and forth. This is why it's good that we have the Twitch chat on the screen, because if they caught something that I didn't, they can luckily add it into the conversation so that we can look at that further. But Riddle of Fire and Riddle of Earth were two new abilities they had. They also showed building Grease Lightning stacks, and Grease Lightning lasts 16 seconds now. I think it's 12 seconds currently. It was shown as 16 seconds in the actual trailer. No, my chat's saying they only described Riddle of Earth and they did not describe Riddle of Fire. Okay, if that changes, then I'll come back to it. Red Mage, they mentioned the Chain Spell trait. So every time you cast a spell that has a cast time, the next spell will be instant. So basically every other spell for Red Mage is instant cast. And with that, you're supposed to build two resources called black and white mana. Your goal is to keep them as balanced as possible until you fill them enough to use other attacks, that expend them to use other attacks. From what we saw, they used the melee attacks, and the melee attacks expended both black and white mana. So that's going to be how we presume that it's going to be used. No, it was instant. It was instant. My chat's saying it was reduced cast time. No. It was straight up instant. All the cast times were instant after whenever he was under the effect of Chain Spell. Also, this crits reducing cast time of same spell type, they said that was a mistake. Later on in the broadcast, they said that was a mistake. So I'm just going to cut that from my notes. They also showed Ninja using their frog attack with the gauge we showed earlier. They showed Ninja using some sort of new melee attack also, but it was so quick I couldn't really see what it was. Samurai they showed the Sen gauge, and they showed the other gauge as well, which was the Kenki gauge. There you go. We saw an ability that looked like Tachi Yukikaze from Final Fantasy XI, and it did give the slashing debuff, mind you. And the different abilities he was using was not only generating this Kenki gauge, but it was building the Sen gauge as well. And the ability he has called, I think it was called, I'm going to butcher all these, Iajutsu or Iajutsu or something like that. It changed depending on how many sends he had. So it's got to have a different effect depending on how many sends you've generated. When he used it with 2, it was like the conal attack we see used in the benchmark. When he did it with 3, it was a different attack altogether. So the only one we haven't seen is what it looks like with just 1 sen. They switched back to the live cam, and then they showed us the job action trailer. Now, I've already covered a lot of these details going in. They showed Red Mage using some new AoE and single target, what looked to be instant cast abilities, maybe off global cooldowns. They showed the dash in, the combo, the dash out, and the giant holy flare. The physical attacks used the meter, and just to clarify, that crit for synergy thing didn't exist. EI. So everyone says it's EI Jutsu. There you go. EI Jutsu. So we'll get that next time. Dragoon was kind of weird. So they used Wheeling Thrust and Fang and Claw back to back. They finished with one and then did the other one immediately after and generated the Blood of the Dragon twice at that point. Whenever they used the jump, the gauge also glowed, and then they had another attack that they used in order to do something else. Eventually what happened is they used that attack, and the eye on the thing glowed. And then when they did Jir Skogul, the bar changed to a different color, and I think they had access to new attacks at that point. Dark Knight had their blood gauge. Some skills were building gauge. Dark Arts didn't inherently use the gauge, but some of the skills that he used expended the gauge as well. Bard was a big one. Casting times are gone on Bard and Machinist, and that was the first thing we noticed. Venomous Bite and Wind Bite had new animations, and on top of that, the songs that they were using were being cast on the target. So they weren't just a song that they were using. It was actually an ability, an instant ability that was hitting the opponent and then providing the Bard with a gauge that they could keep track of. For the Ballad Bard, it just showed a gauge, which we can scroll back up and show since there's 3 of them. For Bard, Ballad doesn't have anything special about it. It kind of just, they each have their own thing on the left. But Ballad, in terms of like the buff management, is just the song itself. For Payon was the same thing. It hit the enemy, and then it had like 4 little musical notes at the bottom. And then for, what was the last one? And then for Wanderers, which doesn't give you cast times anymore, it had 3 gauges at the bottom, which looked like arrows. He expended those arrows to do a skill at some point in the job action trailer. And again, we'll be covering all of that in more exact detail in a later video. On top of that, he did some other giant AoE buff, which I think is when he used the flute. Scholar had a tether that the fairy had to the target. That used the fairy gauge, so that's the one from the benchmark trailer. Also, they had a gauge to keep track of ether pool. They had like an analyze type skill. Now, Final Fantasy III, scholars were known for two things: having enhanced item usage and the use of the Libra skill, which analyzes opponents so you know their weaknesses. So I'm assuming it's some sort of, because obviously enemies don't really have weaknesses, so it has to be some sort of debuff on the target. You see it actually hit the target. And using Etherflow built Fairy Gauge. They also had some sort of new, like, on global cooldown nuke, like Broil, in a sense. Ninja was another interesting one. They used Huton for Gauge. They used Huton and it shows up, like the little pinwheel thing that was up on the picture we showed earlier. It appeared on the Gauge. They then used Shikuchi and then used Raiton and the Frog, and then Shikuchi'd again very, very quickly. The most interesting thing is the time between Huton and Raiton was not very long at all. The Shikuchi also, right after the Raiton, they did Shikuchis, two of them back to back. So it happened. Like, there's just so much. The one thing I will note is when the ninja did use hide at one point. I'm wondering if using hide resets your ninjutsu so you can do things like that in dungeons, because otherwise the hide was meaningless. I really think that might be the thing for out of combat in dungeons, is to use hide to reset your ninjutsu cooldown, which would be really cool. Otherwise, the ninjutsu cooldown is way lower than it was before because they used Huton and Raiton way too close back to back. Then they were just building Gauge, whatever. He dropped a ley lines looking circle. Now, this was interesting. He did one of his mudras, then did Fuma. Then did another one. He didn't do Raiton, he did Katan. He didn't do Raiton, he did Katan. He did one, then he did Fuma. Then he did one more. He didn't do two mudras. He did a single mudra and did Katan, and then he did a third mudra and did Suiton. What I'd have to imagine is going on here is the ley lines is giving him these like chain ninjutsus, and it's like carrying over the first ninjutsu to the second use. It's kind of weird to describe. So like, I'm gonna, just because it's an easier combination, I know it off the top of my head, let me use Suiton. Let me use Tenchi Jin as an example. I don't know the other Suiton combination off the top of my head. So Tenchi Jin is 10 on itself would give you a Fuma Shuriken. Tenchi would give you a Raiton, and Tenchi Jin would give you a Suiton. So imagine he did 10 Fuma, Chi, Raiton, Jin, Suiton. It's almost like it's remembering the first mudra that he used or the previous mudras and just allowing him to add one on to do another one. It's not entirely clear exactly how it's going to work, but if I'm assuming that somebody in the chat knows the combination that leads from Fuma into Katan into Suiton, I'm almost positive that's exactly what it was that he did right there. For Machinist, their cast time's also gone. They have a heat gauge, and they used the flamethrower to build it. We didn't see it move too much after he used the flamethrower, though. We saw some new on-global cooldown skills for them. We know the heat gauge is gotten with Gauss Barrel. He did a giant AoE and also another analyze-looking skill. And then there was just a bunch of off-global cooldown animations that were kind of hard to keep track of. One of the big things is they only have 3 ammo now. Okay, according to the chat for the ninja thing, Jin Tenchi was the combination that was used in the actual video right there. So I'm curious to see. I also want to know if I use a global cooldown skill, does that screw with that skill that laid the ley lines down for ninja? There's a lot of questions we still have about all that. Warrior, we went over it already. Switching stances, dropped gauge by 50%, something worth noting. Did 4 fell cleaves, punched the dummy. We saw all those skills earlier, so we don't need to go over that. Summoner was the biggest one. This is the one that people had the biggest reaction to. He did everything normal. Was using dots. I only saw 2 dot animations, though, mind you, and one of them looked new. Went Dreadworm, expended it. Used Etherflow, went Dreadworm, expended it. He then turned his Garuda Eggy into a giant Bahamut. So, that was impressive. You really need to see it, and when we go over the job action trailer, we'll talk about it in more detail. White Mage, I have no idea what happened. They were building lilies. They said they were bolstering their role as a pure healer. We saw Stone 4. We saw Arrow 2, Arrow 3. They expended lilies, and it did something, and they said that lilies can make other actions available more frequently or shorten recast times on skills. It's one of those jobs I just feel like I don't know what I saw, because you really need to see all the buff icons and it in action to really understand what happened. So that video is going to be a short one when we get to it. Black Mage, we saw the Enochian, we saw the AoE Thunder, we saw the tier 4 spells using Umbral Hearts, we covered that already. Astros, the only big thing is their card UI is very intuitive now. It tells you the effect of your Royal Road, what card is saved, what card is pulled, and there's also a new symbol that he was able to get. He got one that was the Lord and one that was the Lady, which is something we noticed from the benchmark trailer. The Lady he used to heal, and the Lord he used on the enemy in some way. He also had an ability that pulled all 4 slots at once. He Royal Roaded something, he spreaded something, he pulled a card, and he had a Lord, or I think he had a Lord that time. So he pulled all of them at once, and that was also pretty impressive. My big thing with the Astro is he put a star, like a mini galaxy on the arena, and you could see an AoE around it. And then it gradually got bigger and bigger, and then eventually exploded. We don't know what the effect is, but it looked cool as hell. Monk, honestly, horrible display. We know that they have that new skill. We see them use what we can assume is one either Riddle or Fire or Riddle or Earth. And we see the chakra stacks building from that AoE buff we were told about earlier. But it was a tough thing to display. I didn't feel like as excited watching Monks, even if what they told us they're getting is actually pretty good. Samurai, again, same thing as earlier. They showed them building the Sens. They even showed them use a self buff and then use all of their combo finishers back to back. I have to assume that's Final Fantasy XI's Meiko Shisui, which honestly, considering a lot of those skills looked familiar to Final Fantasy XI skills, I wouldn't be too surprised if they just straight up took Meiko Shisui out and it's just like exactly that, almost like a perfect balance for Samurai in a sense. Paladin was the last one, so there's a lot of information here. Oath gauge, that's their gauge. Like the Deliverance Defiance thing, that's theirs. They get Shield Oath at level 30 now. That's a nice little detail. Block now works on both physical and magical attacks. Honestly, the biggest change that they probably needed, because the biggest problem was block was useless against magical attacks. So that means Sheltron is literally Spelltron. Royal Authority also comboed off Royal Authority also comboed off Riot Blade in this video, as opposed to Savage Blade. Sheltron used 50 of their Oath gauge in order to activate, and their gauge stopped going up. When they were in Sword Oath, their gauge was constantly going up. When they switched to Shield Oath, it stopped. So it might be that you need to get hit, because he never got hit because he was fighting a training dummy, and that's why we didn't see it go up. They have a new single target nuke that had a cast time. We'd have to assume it uses their MP, obviously, but we couldn't actually see their MP. Every time they switch oaths, the gauge went down by half. They had a new AoE weapon skill that we later found out was on the global cooldown. And their big new ability is Passage of Arms. We got this detail later also. It gives them 100% block rate, and it's channeled like Collective Unconscious is channeled for Astro. It's channeled in the same way. And it also reduces the damage of everyone standing behind the Paladin by 15%. So it looked badass. It's practical because block works on everything now, and it also acts as raid damage mitigation. On top of that, we do eventually see him use Divine Veil later, so we know that stayed. Clemency was on his hotbar later, we know that stayed. So they really are like buckling down into this whole, I will make sure everyone is safe kind of thing, while also giving them some quality of life changes that should improve the overall effect that Paladins have in different scenarios. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty impressive what they managed to do to Paladin. Then they came back, they did some commentary, which we all just covered right there. Then they talked about some of the things we've covered already. Skills automatically scaling up. So we mentioned this prior with the way that Thunders worked. We said that Thunder 4 was there, and we talk about it later. So basically, if you get a skill that eventually turns into a higher tier skill, like Stone 1 eventually becomes Stone 2, Stone 3, Stone 4, it'll just automatically level up and replace it on your hotbar. So you don't need to put Stones 1, 2, 3, and 4 all on your hotbar. Obviously, Stone 1 had its heavy effect removed, or this wouldn't really apply there. But it basically means that you just put Stone on your hotbar, and it'll just level with you. If you level sync, it'll automatically scale down to the highest level available. So if you end up in, I guess, Sastasha, and you have Stone 4 on your bar, as soon as you zone into Sastasha and you're level synced, it'll switch back to Stone 1, pretty much. That way you don't need to keep adding all those things to your hotbar. It's smart, and it knows what level ranges it's looking for to determine how your hotbar space is going to look. Thunder 1 and Thunder 3 were shared. Thunder 2 is now an AoE Thunder, and Thunder 4 is the evolved version of that. We saw White Mage in the trailer. We saw them use Arrow 3 and Arrow 2, so we can assume that it's consolidated into 2 there. They said Ruin would be upgraded similarly, but that's weird because Ruin 1 is not instant cast, Ruin 2 is instant cast, Ruin 3 is Dreadworm Trance. And then there's still these suspect that one of their other new skills looks like a new Ruin. So I wonder if that's going to replace Ruin 1, or how it's going to work, because we don't actually know yet. So with all that, should have a lot more hotbar space going into the expansion. Now we get to talk about substats. Parry's gone, accuracy gone, and piety is now a substat. But there are new stats in the place of the other existing stats. So parry was replaced by the tenacity stat, which is a tank-only stat. Raises damage dealt, reduces damage taken, only on tank gear. Now parrying is still possible, blocking is still a thing. It's just that you can't, it's a flat value. It's not raised with stats anymore. It's a flat value, plus you have skills that increase your parry and block rate as well. And also, parry and block is now no longer conally in front of you. It also blocks attacks that are behind you. How that looks, I don't know, but it is what it is. Accuracy is also gone. As long as you're fighting an enemy that is equal to or under your level, from the front of the boss, you will have 100% accuracy. That's important because from the flank, you have 110% accuracy, and from the rear, you have 120% accuracy. Apparently, that's only supposed to be taken into account things like evasion up on the boss or a blind on your tanks or your physical DPS. So it only really matters when you're blinded. It means getting rid of blind is pretty important at this point. They replaced accuracy on gear and materia with direct hit rate. Basically, it's a mini crit. It's a crit that occurs more frequently than a normal critical hit rate, but it deals less damage. Now, the big thing is you can have a direct hit and a critical hit at the same time for a direct crit, which will basically take both damage multipliers and combine them to do an insane amount of damage. So you'll have things that synergize with crit, you'll have things that synergize with direct hit, and it'll be how much you really value those stats depending on, I guess, how your new rotations actually end up panning out. Piety also, I said, is no longer a main attribute. It's now a sub-attribute. Honestly, that doesn't even really change anything. It just means that when you make a new character or like your racial stats, that piety's not a part of it anymore. That's not really that big of a deal. It only affects healer MP, as well as direct hit rate. Direct hit rate was not DPS only. No, it says only applied to equipment for DPS jobs. Yeah, so it's only applied on equipment for DPS jobs, but could a tank meld direct hit rate? I guess that's a big question. I guess that's a question for really all the stats still. But it says only applied to equipment for DPS jobs. So I'd have to assume that only DPS can actually benefit from direct hit overall. It's not just on the equipment. It's like literally they're the only ones who could benefit from it. They're also changing some damage calculations. Now they mentioned improving the effect of strength on tanks, but that you can literally no longer wear strength accessories. Accessories are now roll locked. Vitality accessories can only be worn by tanks. Strength accessories only worn by the DPS that use strength. Dexterity accessories only equipable by Bard, Machinist, Ninja. So you won't have situations where a new player picks up Ninja, they're like, yeah, and they see strength increase physical attacks. Yeah, I'm going to go full strength accessories. You literally can't even do that anymore. It also means tanks can't use strength accessories anymore. So keep that in mind. So there's a lot of changes going on there as well. It also means no more item level cheesing, like just throwing on vid accessories just to get item level and stuff like that. We also got to see our first look at the ground mount speed changes. We got to see the fastest speed. We didn't get to see the medium speed. We only got to see the fastest speed. So it was fast. You got to see the video. Like, I can't describe to you how fast it was. It was really fast. They also confirmed that the tank mounts will fly in the expansion, and that you'll unlock these features. You'll unlock the first speed up when completing the main quest in an area. The second one is still unknown. We don't know how you get the actual fastest speed available. So please continue to speculate. Hi. Also, they said they're not doing the cloud motorcycle, so stop asking. Then we got to PvP changes. You can leave now if you want. So current issues, level restrictions too high, too many job actions. PvP is not PvE, and the actions should be separate. Action point disparity, overly complex controls. It's time for change. I'm actually a pretty big fan of most of these PvP changes. So level restriction removal. Now let's be clear about this. It's not a complete removal. You need to at least be a job that is level 30 or higher, and then you can just queue into PvP. They didn't say if you could level with PvP though, which is my next question regarding that. PvP attributes are determined by role and completely equalized depending on which role you pick. All tanks will have the exact same amount of health. All healers will have the exact same amount of health and mind. All melee DPS will have the same strength or dexterity and the same vitality. That way it's entirely based on sort of your in-game play and not the gear you bring into PvP. That means gear is appearance only, otherwise stats are completely equalized. They're also giving us PvP-specific hotbars, so you don't have to just keep adding on PvP skills whenever you go from PvE to PvP. As soon as you enter a PvP zone, like the Wolf's Den Pier or one of the front lines, it'll automatically change to the PvP hotbar. They showed off some of the HP equalization. The Dragoon and the White Mage had equal HP, but the Red Mage had like 2,500 less HP. So we'll see how that actually ends up panning out. Now, as for PvP action changes, all PvP actions are now PvP specific. You have 9 or 10 actions per job on top of your basic combos. You have 2 selectable actions between a list of, I think it was like 8 to 10, and you have your Adrenaline Rush. So this allows them to adjust just the PvP skills without having to rebalance PvE skills. Something they were already kind of doing, but now they don't need that little text at the bottom of every skill. In PvP, it's different. It's just PvP skills are different. Also, directional requirements for melee DPS have been completely abolished in PvP, and they consolidated combos to free up hotbar space. They said less complexity means more maneuverability. Let's talk about that complexity. So now you have combo buttons, where one button will automatically change for the entire combo. So let's look at, I guess it's either Fang and Claw or Wheeling Thrust. Let's use Aeolian Edge for Ninja as an example. The way Aeolian Edge works now in PvE is, you do your first tier ability, you do your second tier ability, and then you do Aeolian Edge. The way it would work is you just have an Aeolian Edge button, and it would just do it's just the same button. You press it 3 times every time the global cooldown comes back up, then bam, it'll just do those skills, and it'll change that one action time and time again. If you've played games like Guild Wars 2 or Blade and Soul, it's very commonly used in many action MMORPGs. Now, that being said, that is a PvP only change. That is not in PvE. The main reason being that PvP is about giving you more maneuverability in combat to be more situationally aware, so you're not constantly monitoring like 30 buttons on your hotbar. I'd also have to imagine it's for easier use of quick chat in the feast, because quick chat is still there. Now then they get to select 2 actions out of a set of several. This is very reminiscent of League of Legends to me, where you pick summoner spells, or you pick your keystone masteries. You're able to pick 2 additional actions out of a list of several. You're able to pick 3 traits out of a list of several. And those are pretty much something you'll do out of combat and then bring them into PvP entirely. It's also worth mentioning, combos did not cost TP in PvP. Instead, their utilities costed PvP. Jump costed 400 TP, for example, and weapon throw costed 200 TP. So you'll be managing that for your utilities, but not for your main damage combo. And then let's see. So then we have the selected 3 traits out of the 9 or 10. Black Mage is described as entirely different from PvE, because I know some of you are wondering how those button change things happen. They didn't show us, but they said Black Mage is entirely different, because that whole the whole combo thing that works for the melee DPS does not work for Black Mage or Summoner or anything like that. So those 2 are just completely different. They said they're going to do probably like a preseason and an adjustment period after these changes are made, because they probably need to do some pretty major balancing, I imagine. And then we got to this little tidbit. I'm going to have to give my thoughts on this a million fucking times, so let's just get to it. They have decided they will be adding the Story Jump Potion and the Job Level Boost Potion. They will be added, both of them, on June 16th when Early Access goes live. They've given us a full list of details here, going over what they will do exactly. So, of course, their goals alleviate playtime between new and veteran players, lessens playtime to reach endgame content, increases opportunity to get friends and family to play the game with you. So, it'll be $18 to skip to 2.55's story completion. It'll be $25 to skip to 3.56's story completion. If you wish to skip from 2.55 to 3.56, it'll still cost the full $25. You're not just going to get the $7 difference right there. It's not prorating you in any way. It'll only complete the main scenario and a few key side quests to unlock things like dungeons and I'd imagine Palace of the Dead. You'll automatically get a chocobo with a random name. Your Grand Company enrollment will be set to your starting city state, and the unending journey will have all the viewable cutscenes. And then on top of that, remember that this story boost potion does not level your jobs for you. It is strictly if you don't care about the story and you want to skip ahead to that. For the job level boost, it raises the level of a single job to 60, not available for Red Mage and Samurai. It does not work on crafting or gathering jobs, so those you'll always have to level the good old-fashioned way. Those will be $25 per job, but the most important thing is, at least between 4.0 and 4.1, you can only buy one potion per account, because it's just meant to be a catch-up tool. They said they'll reevaluate and see what they want to do after 4.1. Honestly, considering Square Enix is a business, I won't be surprised at all if this limitation drops entirely. But for now, that is entirely the way it's going to be. And again, this potion does not complete your main scenario for you. So if you want to skip both the main scenario and level a job, you'll be spending $50 pretty much. This one comes with a full set of level 60 gear, all jobs complete, all actions learned, and it'll throw you into Hall of the Novice to at least explain your basic role. I know I'm going to get asked a million fucking times, I've already done my video on this. My thought on this: if you want to be good at something, it doesn't matter if you're stuck through 300 story quests before you get there, or you jump all the way to the end. If you care about playing well, you'll try to play well. If you don't give a shit, you won't. Because if you're telling me that doing 3 years worth of story quests has made our player base stronger, I've done a lot of Duty Finder, man. I've seen a lot of people who just don't give a fuck. And I've seen people who are trying to learn their rotations before they can even get their skills. There's a very different mindset there. And purchasing a potion doesn't make your mindset any different. It's all going to come down to whether or not these people want to be good players, or if it's just veteran players buying them just to like level an account on another server or something like that. So those are my thoughts on it. I'll have to make another fucking video about it because I've had to make, I think, like 6 videos at this point on jump potions. It's going to happen. I'm personally okay with the idea of jump potions, especially when they do things like the job limitation, so you can't just jump like 13 jobs all the way to max level. But we'll see if that limitation is still there after 4.1. Now, and then they just did announcements. This isn't even that important. Reminders of the pre-order bonuses, the Far Edge of Fate soundtrack, the Bahamut Escape game. Final Fantasy XIV will have a live letter from E3 with a battle challenge that is a 4.0 primal. That would mean Lakshmi or Susano, in theory. New merchandise, which I can't spell, which was the fat chocobo head pillow Yoshi P was carrying the whole time. Reminder for the projection mapping event, and reminder for the symphony event. There you go. That is pretty much a live letter. That is the fastest I could possibly get through it without stopping and explaining absolutely everything. And even then, I stopped more than I wanted to. Like I said, I'm going to have to make a million smaller videos for this because there's so much information that expecting someone to digest my entire overview here, even with timestamps, is a little bit overwhelming. People are going to be looking for more specific information, so expect a slew of videos regarding everything here, and if you've already listened to this entire thing, expect it to be a repeat with some minor additions added in. But on that note, it's hot as hell. I had to turn my box lights off. You could see the green screen the whole video. I'm hot as hell. I got water. I'm thirsty. I want to hang out with my Twitch chat. I am going to wrap up this video. Thank you for joining, and be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share to stay up to date on everything Stormblood, both before and after the expansion launch. I'll be hanging out with my Twitch chat for a little bit, guys, so be sure to stick around if you're watching live. Thank you for watching if you're watching this over on YouTube, and I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care.